I've got my cowl neck uh, little camouflage shirt on. I actually got this for my son, but I'm certain that he won't mind me borrowing it. Um, Not for. Um, I titled this, Where is the Oppenheimer Painting? I'm talking about the Oppenheimer painting that I can't even remember where I saw it. It might have appeared on the Antiques Roadshow, but it's a painting. It's signed by Oppenheimer. I've talked about this before, but it's a little bit important to what I'm realizing about the isotopic and cubic in a different kind of way from a female's perspective. And it's not a mystical perspective. It's the female voice is not heard. And the politics of the 1960s and the women's liberation wasn't really necessarily a woman's voice, a female's voice from a traditional role standpoint anyway. So there was a painting that was signed by Oppenheimer, so I can only assume that Oppenheimer painted it. It was a very dark, I can't even remember the surroundings. It might have been like a dark forest. And then in the center was this tiny little illuminating light. It kind of is reminiscent of the concept behind Thomas Kincaid paintings. Only this one was very specifically more in contrast. There was less color, and it was really only really dark around, and then in the center was like this tiniest diamond almost. And yes, I am making that analogy for personal reasons that I'm not going to go into. I was discussing yesterday about the isotopic versus cubic systems and the confusion and what my inclination to in the definition of isotopic, and I read the definition that Wikipedia has posted. Let's see if I can quickly refer that an isotope seems to me like the result of an explosion, and then later it comes together, and so it's many different shapes and sizes with unequal sides. And cubic is, of course, 4 equal sides, equilateral. And the fact that Wikipedia, and I've discovered something else about Wikipedia also, I have to ask myself if some of the stuff isn't concocted based on political alliances made, like some of the information, which is why when I read the term isotope is formed from quoting from the Greek roots isos, meaning equal, and topos, meaning place, meaning the same place. Thus, the meaning behind the name is that different isotopes of a single, element occupy the same position on the periodic table. And it's interesting to me that the atom bomb is um, is uh, of course it was created by Oppenheimer, and everything that I'm saying has already been manipulated. I probably should have been. They're always, the guilty parties are always trying to incorporate me in the mess that they've created of so many lives. So the person who I grew up with, knowing as my younger sister Leah, I found another really tiny caveat of information, or interesting uh, kernel of, I don't know how to put it, that Oppenheimer created the atom bomb, which destroyed a lot of lives and caused, I would call, an isotopic, both in humanity, in the existence of everyone it affected, and obviously some more directly than others, but many were and still are being affected by the atom bomb in some way or another. And to me, that's an isotopic um, result. There's an isotopic result both in humanity and in geographic physical condition of the earth, the buildings, uh, everything around it. So it's interesting to me that Oppenheimer Funds has gone from being the creator and the creator of the condition, not of the atom bomb, which created uh, a condition of isotopic existence for many humans, both emotionally and some physically, and an isotopic condition of the geographic areas which it affected. And now Oppenheimer has their logo is, if they still have it, I can pull that up. It's four arms connecting, like, and then two down like this, which is cubic, obviously. The case of hasn't come up before, like I on some level, and within the economic system, the roles that, and I think I realize that the Oppenheimer family, if you want to say born of Oppenheimer, who created the atom bomb. So the so it's interesting within my own family, because me and my younger sister Leah, we don't look anything alike. And my younger sister Leah is married to an Indonesian man who obviously by look has a lot of Asian, and evidently there was some kind of migration um, from Indonesia to Holland or whatever it was. I don't know. Um, That's not the point of the story. The story is that my younger sister Leah married an Indonesian man whose Asian descent is very visible. But the interesting thing is in this story that Oppenheimer, because he resembles Jeremy Kilpatrick, the person that I knew as Jeremy Kilpatrick at 1555 Washington Street, and I even mentioned it to him at the time I was involved with him. And I think I even made a copy of the one picture that was on Google that, like, to me looked exactly like Jeremy Kilpatrick. But the interesting point is, as far as lineage goes, that my younger sister Leah has the same shaped head and pursy little lips, and they tend to keep their lips sealed. And while in other words, they're very selfish people, selfish in regard to everything. My younger sister Leah is, although she and those around her make certain that she comes off as something different. But when you pull the curtain back, and it's a very large curtain, unveiling of the eyes and all. So she has the same size, the same shaped head. It's like oblong, almost like this way. And so, sorry, I'm going to talk about her head, but the whole time I was growing up, no one seemed to mind calling me bull and ball head all the time, among other insults. And my younger sister Leah is famous for her impersonations and making fun of absolutely everyone, and me being one of her favorite people to make fun of. That's not really my character, but I'm reserving the right. And her daughter, her and Steve's daughter, assuming that Rebecca is Steve's daughter, Rebecca has the same shaped head. So thereby it tells me where my niece Rebecca has this very princess-like, and I never could understand it. And I never could understand her attitude towards me. I didn't spend a lot of time in Rebecca's life. It was one of those things where I thought they were living in Holland, but very possibly they were traveling back and forth at the time from Holland to the United States and to other places. But the point of it is the lineage. And the further, because Jeremy Kilpatrick never treated me very nicely at all. And this isn't a matter of me whining. It's a matter of identifying yet another area where there was battle that is that's coming to surface that sort of explains more as to my younger sister Leah's audacity and the amount of backing that she's had in the things that she's accomplished in and within her pursuit of betrayal of me, and stems back from our childhood. And and my younger sister Leah is also one of those people who needs everybody to go through what she went through as a child. And she assumed that none of us had experienced anything close to what she had experienced. So she's developed really a psychopathic existence in my life and in my children's lives. And and the original backing that she had was through her partying connections, which she maintained throughout her lifetime. So I'm just uh, identifying and establishing my case against my younger sister Leah. And it's important because I'm still battling for my own identity and the character who I know I am, and that it also includes my right to have my own biological children and my biological grandchildren in my life, and my biological children, both adult and minor age, to be free of Leah Freda and all of the because I have my own wealth. And Oppenheimer, I think, knew that, and that was the basis of, among other things, of that painting. And then Thomas Kincaid came along and used the painting, and and things grew and grew and grew. However, it also attends to my constant question within my niece Rebecca's attitude towards me, even though, like I said, I've hardly spent any time with any of my nieces, but they found it within their. By the time any of them were old enough to do anything, I had already moved to Colorado, and I have no guilt because I have no no guilt of them, and I know it yet again. When I made the decision to move to Colorado, it was an opportunity for the adults in their lives who were actually hands-on guilty of them to that I was used as a dumping ground, unbeknownst to me at the time in 1996. But this little caveat of information in regard to Oppenheimer, which came only because I'm questioning the definition of isotope and cubic. It's interesting that these dots have been connected in my personal life within a question that I'm having regarding isotopic versus cubic definition. And then to realize like I was saying, the atom bomb and how it created, and to me, isotope again, it almost feels instinctual. An isotope is actually a shattering of an explosion, and the pieces that are created after the explosion are isotopic. They're shattered, different size, different it's like more like scalene triangles, shattered And and that a cubic system is a more structured, uh, more solid system of, if you want to say, crystals formed. And I also refer to the crystal of a snowflake. And would you call a snowflake? And I'm asking this question because I find that every question that I ask leads me to uh, answers and more truth. So a snowflake, I would call a cubic crystal because it has um, 6 sides. I don't know if I've ever seen. I don't know if I've ever seen a snowflake with 8 sides. I had asked a man one time when I was sitting at McDonald's as a homeless person in Maryland in like 2015, 16, much older man, and he sat down and I said, just, excuse me, sir. I struck up a conversation with him. I can't remember how I opened the conversation. Sometimes it's just on my mind and so I'll start the conversation. And I said, excuse me, sir, have you ever looked at it might have been snowing at the time and I was marveling yet again at the snow. And have you ever looked at, have you, and I wasn't being like challenging or anything. I was like, yeah, probably marveling at the snow at the time. And and he said, no, I've never. I said, did you ever realize, and this was a man who was much older than me. And I said, did you, so did you ever realize that a snowflake actually looks like um, the little the little crystal shapes, that we cut out and make as a child? That a snowflake actually looks like that. If you let one land on your glove or your hand or whatever, usually your glove, because your hand's too warm for it to, it'll melt. And if you look at it very closely, you can see the individual snowflakes that are in the formation of those fancy little, um, like the snowflakes that we cut out of construction paper when we were children growing up in elementary school. And I remember that was years ago when I first noticed that, decades, and I'm still so fascinated by it. And so a snowflake I would label as cubic because it's 6-sided. And even if it's 8-sided, it's still cubic. And again, there's that sort of Oppenheimer's logo really kind of strikes me interesting, that they would display, now I don't know, elbow to the hand, but they're connected in the shape of a cube, of a square. And I just find that interesting. And of course, I also find it interesting the connection of and as to where my relationship, or really lack thereof, because I didn't have a relationship with my niece Rebecca, because I wasn't around. They moved to Holland, and my sister was pregnant at the time, and then I moved to Colorado when there was an instance where I saved my niece Rebecca's life when she was a little girl, in much the same way that I saved my younger sister Leah's life in the car when we were children. And my younger sister Leah was sitting by the door of the car, and the car door. We were on our way back on our way to 1657 Woodburn Avenue, where we were residing. And from my grandmother Betty's house, and I happened to notice that the car door was opening, and she was asleep and leaning on the car door, and it was creaking open more and more. And so I grabbed her and pulled her up, and had JFH2 pulled the car over so that the car door could be closed. And then I saved my niece Rebecca's life in my car, because she was sitting in the back seat by the door, and she kept opening the door. And so I yelled at her, and she stopped, because she kept opening and laughing and giggling in the back seat. And we were like, what is she giggling about? And Leah looked back and said, Rebecca, stop opening the door, blah, blah, blah. So, but she wouldn't stop until I yelled at her. And I yelled at her with compassion, but I yelled at her. And so I didn't expect, and still don't expect, I just find it ironic that I saved this child's life, or at least got her to stop opening and closing the car door, while the car was riding. And I saved my younger sister Leah's life from falling out of the Mustang when we were children. And this is the way they act towards me. And it's even plays back to the reunion that we went to, and my younger sister Leah drove to the reunion with me, and it was a big reunion, family reunion. And I was leaving. We had been there for a few hours, maybe an hour or two, and I don't do parties, so I was ready to leave. And I drove over, and Leah rode with me, and I just left without saying anything. And then I got almost to my car, and I said, you know what, I need to just make sure that she has a ride. I don't want to just leave without letting her know that I'm going. So I went back in, and I found her, and I said, Leah, I'm leaving, so I just wanted to make sure that you have a ride or whatever. And she went into this big dramatic response. Oh, thank you, Dawn. Thank you for coming and seeing if I have a ride. And like really, really dramatic. Along the same lines of like, but different topic, as when I asked her about, in other words, in retrospect, I could tell it was totally sarcastic. I can tell now what I couldn't tell then. She was being totally sarcastic and making fun of me, because I assumed that that she might need a ride from me back, like, and in her mind, she's this great party person with all these friends and connections. Why would she ever need me to give her a ride from the party? So And then again, going back to her connections at the time, of which I know she's maintained, um, which is why what I'm dealing with her is an ongoing, continued battle, because I still don't have the extensive connections in the community, not in the Christian community, not in the Messianic community, not in the party community, not in the corrupt legal system community, not in it. Her connections extend far and wide. Um, and it's one of those things where I assumed that when we become grown-ups, when we become adults, chronologically age adults, I assumed that everybody kind of closed their circle of friends down a little, a little, well, a lot. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was never a social person, but there were certain friends that I had that I cut out of my life because of the differences that I could see in our characters as mothers that I was uncomfortable with. And but in regard to the connections that my younger sister Leah had, and then the fact that I'm really certain she's who stole my FBI employee badge out of my, and what she had the audacity to do with my FBI employee badge, and to accomplish in a very dangerous for the entire world type of way, because I attribute very much, and the fact that she's used my identity and the things that she's done directly affects my character, and the cross that I'm bearing, and the assumptions that are made about me on a daily basis. Because within the computer technology system, and as it grew, analogs and logarithms and numbers are all very important. And so your social security number, and the fact that she stole my identity, and it's been stolen several times since, more frequently since 2005. It all affects my existence and my children's existence. And interesting that I thought, before I realized the possible direct connection lineally, as in bloodline, of the original Oppenheimer, who developed the atom bomb, to my younger sister Leah, and my niece Rebecca. It all adds up yet again. And so to identify the battles of my childhood within the battles of the economy, and the battles of global geographic nature, is important to me. It's important to be able to raise myself up out of the and out from under the very huge cross that they've all very, very sneakily created for me to carry for them. And what I realized recently the legalization of marijuana, which began in Colorado. Actually, I think the stirrings of it began in Harford County, I think. And I'm only basing this on the people who I can see now were involved, including my younger sister Leah. And I'm not going to say allegedly, because it simply all adds up. And I have a very analytical mind. Um, the the legalization of marijuana, and how when I was resigning at Lakewood and experiencing the things that I was experiencing at those apartments. And I have to ask myself if there was if there was a Visa card or a MasterCard, a credit card issued in my name during that process. Because I also realize that all systems become fragmented at the convenience of the corrupt people who have been involved. So, in other words, I believe that it's very possible that there was a credit card issued in my name, Dawn Henderson, during the legalization of marijuana. And there are two different banks, Oppenheimer obviously being one, that might have issued such a card and handed it to my younger sister Leah. And there would be no way for me to discover it, because I didn't have the connections within the banking system that Mr. Oppenheimer had. And so the case of the missing credit card that goes back to 514 Nanticoke Court, of which I spent 3.5 months in jail for, defending myself in a very physiological, automatic reflex, self-defensive response, in pushing back with my feet as Charlotte was coming at me like this, while I was in lotus position and I was very vulnerable physically, intellectually, and emotionally at the time. And Charlotte came down the stairs and started tearing around the room. And but the point of the matter is, she was accusing me of stealing her credit card, which I hadn't. And at some point within the past, I want to say like 6 months, because when you've experienced so much betrayal and so much, like, why am I having so much issues? Why? And so you look back and start connecting the dots. And at some point, like within the past 6 months, I started to wonder if the credit card that Charlotte was talking about was actually a credit card in my name that they all were passing around. It isn't far-fetched. It isn't. The story isn't far-fetched, and I'm not grasping for straws. When you so my allegation that the credit card that I went to jail because I defended myself um, while sitting on in lotus position on a bed that where Charlotte Henderson was coming at me like to choke me like this, and my camera keeps switching off. So there's the whole digital switch off that takes place every time. Um, and I was denied the right to enter a plea of self defense, even though it was clearly self defense. So that I went to jail for 3.5 months, close to 4 months in 2015. For an incident that I was being physically attacked and verbally and sitting in lotus position. Um, and then to realize these, how many years later, 5, 6, 7, 7, 8 years later, to realize that the credit card that was in question may have actually been in my name, and created during the time period of the legalization of marijuana, which I believe my entire family was part of. The whole trafficking, everything that it took to legalize, which included human trafficking, uh, and of my children. And all the little peripheral networks that were created um, as gossip networks, to 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 keep under wraps my innocence and all their guilt. So I was surrounded by thousands of people whose main focus, and then if you consider the aliases involved, I really didn't have a choice, even if I had known, but I didn't even know. I didn't even realize. I was just going about my life, trying to get out of the condition of fighting homelessness, back when marijuana was being and again, the whole credit card issue, if in fact it is true that the credit card was actually in my name, the one that I was being accused of stealing from Charlotte, which I didn't steal in the first place. It's reminiscent of the fact that I was due an inheritance from my grandparents now I can't remember if my grandmother or my grandfather passed away first. I think my grandfather passed away first, and then my grandmother. The inheritance I was due back in 1999, I think it was, and was never told about. And then 6 months later, when I had gone to MedVed here in Colorado to get a car, and Charlotte held me on the phone, just like she always does, because she creates, anytime that I've ever, and Jane F. Henderson II did the same thing, anytime I ask for a small favor, I'm held in this condition of, okay, keep her on the line, because we got to like really play this big, and really make it look like we're doing her a great, great, huge favor, because she's such a horrible person. And that's the way that I'm made to feel, simply by the way that I'm handled when I ask, like I had asked her to co-sign on the loan. And I was actually held at MedVed, me and my first daughter, who was only like 7 years old at the time, I think, until after midnight. And I found it really strange. I wasn't really scared. I was very uncomfortable. I felt like I really don't know if this is appropriate, because obviously I was the only customer there. And they were acting as though they were doing me a great favor by staying there waiting for the return phone call from Charlotte, who was going to do me this great favor of co-signing the loan for this $8,000 vehicle, which I could have paid outright for had Charlotte given me my inheritance in the first place, that from 6 months before, when my grandmother passed. So it's kind of reminiscent of that strategy Charlotte used, if in fact the credit card was in my name and not Charlotte's name, and the credit card was created during the and with the backing of the Oppenheimer connections and Chase Manhattan, because Charlotte had Chase Manhattan connections that were evidently more expensive. And believe me, I'll find it. I'll find where the original connection came from. I know that it had to do with Joan Zack, and therefore WJZ TV comes into question. And so my entire family had way more connections, and than I, and used the connections they had very extensively. And they used it all to keep me holding the bag for everything. And it only comes back to, again, the fact that my last name is legitimately Henderson, and there might be land ownership rights here in Colorado and in a few other states that I have a legal right to claim, and very lucrative. So there is the personal and intellectual interests involved in the question isotopic versus cubic.